It's the Late Night Show with S16vc. Tonight, joining Aleks as a guest, Sherali Karimov. And now here he is, Aleks Shamis.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's a bit of a special one as our guest usually keeps an incredibly low profile. Sherali is a transformational executive coach who has helped build highly functioning, effective, and healthy executive teams behind household name companies such as Miro, Atlassian, and Amplitude, as well as promising startups from the S16 community, including Xentral, Zero, AppFollow, Profi, and Smartcat. Sherali also coached Borzo, which I helped build before starting s16vc. Tonight, let's talk about the intricacies of coaching and help unravel this mysterious yet powerful instrument for personal growth and the growth of your company. Please give it up for the one and only Sherali. Sherali, it's awesome to have you for this conversation about advising.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, stick around because we'll be back with Sherali after our performance break. Yo, listen up. Coaching's art. Let me break it down. Unlocking growth. Wear that coaching crown. 3 levels deep. That's how we roll. Skills, performance, the person within. Let it all unfold.
Sensitivity and empathy, the very core to truly guide and help explore. From defensiveness to curiosity's grace, in this journey we find our place.
To grow, old convictions. We got to forsake it. Not invalid, just new skills at stake. Build new beliefs, let them soar like a kite. In this journey of growth, we find our light.
To be coachable's key, don't resist the flow. Open your mind, let the growth seeds grow. Blind spots and weaknesses, they all can be blessings in disguise if we dare to see.
Delusion's cost, a young founder's plight, advisor's worth, hidden from sight. The impact may be elusive, hard to see, but the potential upside fills us with glee.
Hiring advisors, a superpower so true, but the magic's in openness, in learning from the crew.
I tried to find other interviews to prepare for our conversation, but it seems that you keep an extremely low profile. There is hardly any material available online about you.
I am not consciously hiding. I was actually thinking about it a while back. When I started exploring coaching seriously and researching it, 2 people stood out as inspirations. Andy Grove and Bill Campbell. Both are phenomenal coaches held in the highest regard. When Andy Grove died, Ben Horowitz wrote a deeply touching post about him. They both coached prominent figures such as the founders of Google and Steve Jobs, yet they were extremely different. Andy Grove was a prolific writer with a systematic mind. He wrote many articles and books that I absolutely love, leaving behind a lot of material. He was careful and precise with his wording, and his content represents his personality. Bill Campbell was a complete opposite. He was a people person, always focused on the individual, not on the problem or the business. He swore a lot, was really down to earth, and didn't write anything. I'm not saying I'm like Bill Campbell, but I think that side of coaching is much closer to me. Coaching is about unlocking growth in people, and to me that comes at 3 levels: helping people unlock skill sets, unlocking performance, and unlocking the person. This resonates strongly with me, and that's what Bill Campbell aimed for: making a person not just effective in their job, but a better person overall. Helping people discover themselves and unlock their potential is a special gift to give. The journey of coaching led me there, but I don't know how to write about it. It's complex, nuanced, and personal. At the same time, it could be just an excuse. Writing is a big insecurity of mine, maybe.
I mean, you don't have to write about that specifically, right? But what you're saying resonates with me deeply. And the names of Andy Grove and Bill Campbell and their books, High Output Management and $1 Trillion Coach, as well as Multipliers, which I believe you recommended to me before. These 3 books are like Bibles to me. I used to assign them to every person on my team who was becoming a manager and getting their first subordinates. They're a must-read before they take on accountability for any other human being at the company. Before we go deeper, let's clarify something that often confuses people. Are you an advisor, a coach, or a mentor? How do you identify yourself?
If you were to ask an executive whether they are a manager, coach, recruiter, analyst, or all of the above, the answer would be the same. The roles we play depend on the situation at hand. You did a great job defining some of those roles in your conversation with Elena Verna.
Can you talk a little bit about how you became an executive coach and advisor?
My background is in hardware engineering. I studied microelectronics in the former Soviet Union. This was as far away from coaching people as possible. I wasn't very good at socializing and going deep into conversations. At some point, I switched to software engineering and spent about 8 to 9 years in this field. However, software engineers are also not known for being a very social group of people. The necessity to understand people, their intentions and motivations, first occurred to me after my first failure as a manager in around 2001, when my boss, who was the CTO of our startup, went on holiday. He made me the team lead. I lasted exactly 1 week in that position. Our professional services team was making customizations to our products on the customer side. They had access to CVS, our source code. They checked out the source of the current release, made some changes, and committed it back into the GA branch. I was pissed off because they had modified something we held sacred. Instead of talking to them first to understand what happened, I went and revoked their permissions to access CVS. I was in Australia while they were in the US, so there was a 9 to 10 hour time zone gap. While I was asleep, they attempted to continue working, only to find out that they no longer had access to CVS. This was not a good leadership move on my part. A week later, the CTO returned and demoted me.
Wow, no second chances.
Absolutely, but he had a good conversation with me. He pointed out the mistake I made, why it was important to talk to those guys, explained their perspective to me. I felt really embarrassed. He suggested a few articles, and I came across this article on HBR that said that you could be an introvert or you could be an extrovert, but as a manager, you have no choice but to learn how to be an omnivert. That put me on the path of discovery that being introverted is not an excuse anymore. A year later, he, I guess, believed in me enough, promoted me back into a manager, and that's how my management career began. It was a totally different journey. The painful realization was that there are important things at the next level that you are blind to. To be successful, you must first become aware that there is a skill set or area that you have to explore. It's not just about acquiring more skills. It's about becoming aware of a new area that represents a significant growth leap. The next big step in my career came when I transitioned from engineering to go-to-market. It was an accidental opportunity that I didn't give much thought to, but I figured, why not? My new job involved talking to Atlassian partners who needed to sell software, but weren't very skilled at it. I had to convince them that selling isn't lying, but rather about articulating the highest value that they are trying to deliver, understanding the businesses of their clients and their needs, and showing empathy. It was a big challenge to learn all of that and convey the message to people who were mostly technically minded. This taught me about the power of influence. As Andy Grove explains in his book, a manager's output is not just the output of the people under his or her direct management, but also the output of all the people under his or her influence. The switching to advising was another accidental opportunity. Initially, I didn't think much about it, but then someone suggested that I explore it as a business instead of seeking employment. This started an experiment to see if it was a valuable service that could be monetized. This was the basic level. Then, there was the desire to make a bigger impact. Was this a path where I could make a difference? At an even bigger level, was this a way of self-expression that resonated with me? Because I still see myself as an engineer. Writing code or tinkering with hardware really excites me. In the last 8 years, however, I discovered that helping people unlock their potential is also a very creative, challenging, and nuanced craft. So I gradually came to enjoy it.
Based on my experience working with you, I have always assumed that what makes you a great coach is your unique background in both engineering and business. As you previously shared, you sort of fell into coaching by accident, which I think makes you stand out from an average coach. Do you agree with this assessment? And could you talk more about what led you to switch from coaching your subordinates to consulting?
My experience in engineering, building, and optimizing products, as well as go-to-market strategies, has given me a wide range of skills that allow me to help people with practical tips and tricks. My engineering background enables me to think in models and continuously improve my understanding of how things work. Similarly, in go-to-market strategies, it takes enormous discipline and consistency to build a successful pipeline and execute quarter after quarter. This experience helps me go one level deeper and unlock performance for my clients. I believe there is a third component that's super important when advising, coaching, or mentoring people. Being fundamentally sensitive and empathetic to them and being curious. For me, the switch from defensiveness to curiosity happened through years of therapy. Shedding my defensive behavior and adopting a curious approach was the most significant moment in unlocking my coaching journey. I believe that without this curiosity, it's difficult to go deep and unlock people.
I love the engineering mindset. When I was graduating from high school and couldn't decide on a career, I spoke to my physics teacher, whom I admired and respected a lot. He said, if you don't know what you want to do engineering. It keeps your options open to do anything you want afterwards. That advice worked for me, and for a long time, I strongly believed that everyone I hired should have an engineering degree, regardless of their role. I have since expanded my horizons and no longer hold that belief. However, I still believe that having an engineering background is a strong advantage in almost all fields.
I think one of the things that distorts communication between people is that most of us are really bad at expressing ourselves clearly most of the time. I think the engineering mindset that you acquire when studying engineering teaches you to express yourself very clearly. You must be specific and precise and find the right words and approaches to communicate your ideas effectively. The second thing it teaches you is to think well, to think critically, and to think in models. For example, when discussing revenue, I find that many young founders lack this fundamental skill and hence struggle to build a revenue model and do forecasting based on it. It's a simple skill to learn, and it can really help. The engineering mindset allows you to apply this skill to any area of your startup, business, or life. I first realized this when I was about to graduate from high school during my last 2 years. While talking to one of my teachers, I discovered that the final grade for the year is an average of all the marks given throughout the quarter, plus the mark for the exam. This really opened my eyes. I asked my teacher to show me the paper journals where they kept all the marks for all the students. I identified the subjects where my averages were not high and not leading me to the top mark, and I focused on those subjects every quarter, a couple at a time, so that I received all top marks at the end of the year. That was essential for me because I wanted to attend a specific university. It was a fairly unique opportunity. As a child, I dreamed of becoming a spy. There was one university in Moscow where you could graduate and end up as a foreign spy in the Foreign Intelligence Service. However, 1 year before my graduation, the Soviet Union fell apart and Moscow became a different country. So I switched to hardware engineering. Nevertheless, that example of applying systems to everything that surrounds you and improving your life and building on it with an engineering mindset is still super exciting to me to this day.
Just curious, aren't spies supposed to be very manipulative?
Well, I've heard Simon Sinek say a really interesting thing that resonated with me. He explained the difference between manipulation and leadership. According to him, manipulation is when you manipulate to benefit yourself. Leadership is when you manipulate for the other person's benefit. I found this idea fascinating because sometimes you may notice a blind spot in a person, but you cannot approach them directly and say, "Hey, Alex, you have a blind spot here." Depending on the level of trust, openness, vulnerability, self-confidence, and insecurities of the person, they may become defensive and start explaining why it is not a blind spot. In that case, you have to lead them to discover the blind spot themselves. You are doing it for them, not for yourself. One might argue that this is still manipulation, but hearing Simon Sinek say that during an interview made me feel more at ease about leadership.
Another deep topic is that every weakness or blind spot when it comes to humans can actually be a feature in some context, right?
Absolutely. In fact, in my current model of how it works, there is a deep meaning pertaining to growth there. At some point in our lives, we acquire certain convictions because they become really helpful and make us successful. We continue to practice those things, and the convictions become stronger and stronger, and we grow as a result. However, life goes on and situations change, and we are expected to perform at the next level. For instance, as a developer, you might have been convinced that figuring things out, applying an engineering mindset, debugging well, and writing unit tests are the right approaches to be successful. But once you become a manager, you might start blaming people for not figuring things out, not writing enough tests, not being smart enough, and so on. All the things mentioned above are true. However, there's a deeper layer where people might be struggling. They might be dealing with mental blocks, biases, insecurities, or difficult situations in their personal lives, which is why they're having a hard time performing a task. As an engineer, you may be completely convinced that these issues have nothing to do with it, and that all you have to do is sit down, analyze the problem, figure it out, write some tests, and it'll work. But the human aspect of the problem is a blind spot for you. It's not because you're stupid or incapable of understanding it, but rather because it lies outside of your awareness. It's your blind spot. To develop new skills, you need to kill your old convictions first. This is not because they're completely invalid, but rather because the new skill set is far more important and has a multiplicative effect that leads to a jump in personal growth. First, you start exploring this new area and building new convictions. Then these convictions become stronger and make you successful. However, be careful not to get too rooted in these new convictions, or you may struggle to make the next leap forward. People tend to grow linearly and not exponentially because they struggle to let go of their convictions.
I believe blind spots are often blessings in disguise because once you recognize them, you become self conscious. However, if the timing is not right, they might as well hinder your progress. As you grow, what was once a blind spot, a blessing in disguise, can become your real weakness. At that point, you must address those weaknesses. Personally, for example, I was overconfident when I was young, and that became detrimental to me at a certain point. But if I didn't have that blind spot, I would have never started my first company. I would not have done many things that I did out of that blindness and lack of awareness.
That's a great example. I don't think self-confidence is a blind spot. It's a skill you've mastered really well. However, it could become a blind spot if you need to start questioning things more deeply and your level of confidence gets in the way. You might reject the necessary level of doubt because you think your confidence made you successful. So why start doubting now? This defensive reaction turns confidence into a blind spot. But if you learn to switch to curiosity and approach doubt as a skill set that you can learn and use to various degrees, you can find a balance between questioning things and going too far into analysis paralysis. This is where the unlock happens. You can deploy confidence when you need it and deploy doubt when you need it. And they don't define you. You are free.
Let's move on to a conversation from the perspective of founders. In my exploration of advising over the past several months, I have discovered that most founders have a deeply rooted fear of bringing advisors on board. This fear seems to be much greater than the fear of making a wrong hire, for example. Do you observe the same phenomenon? If you do, or if you don't, why do you think this fear exists?
I often come across founders who are hesitant to work with advisors. They see an advisor as a mysterious person who comes over, has no accountability, charges them for conversations. While it's very difficult to measure the impact of a conversation, when hiring employees, you can assign them specific tasks and measure the output, if not the outcomes. If things don't go well, you can let them go. The expectations and requirements for employees are clear. However, it's not the same with advisors. Another part of the problem is that there are many individuals who call themselves advisors or coaches. They may even possess the required level of technical expertise, but not the level of curiosity and empathy that it takes to put themselves in the founder's shoes. Furthermore, they often lack context about the way the business works, the pressure of it, and the bigger picture of where certain business objectives fit in. Of course, there are also those who transitioned into advising from business. In the past, they experienced certain situations and found good solutions for them. Yet, this alone does not give them the breadth of the experience. To acquire that, you need to be curious. You must approach every conversation with a founder with the intention of learning, not teaching. If you don't connect with their problem, the business they are trying to build, and them as a person, you will make the mistake of giving out your old advice that's only valid in your old context.
In the past, I had biases that I now see in other founders as well. One of these biases is related to mental math. As a young founder, you are often very protective of your dilution. You gauge advisors' hourly rate and think, wow, that's so much money. I could hire a full-time person for that. It took me years to upgrade my mindset and realize that dilution is nothing compared to the potential upside of an advisor saving me years and changing the trajectory of the company.
True. When did you first realize that the advice you were receiving was actually saving you a great deal of time in the future?
I didn't. That comes back to your statement that it's very difficult to measure the impact. I think it really is. There is a high chance that you won't feel it. What I realized is that it's okay to fail in your engagement with an advisor as long as you can iterate quickly. For example, it's okay if I dilute 0.5% once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, or even 10 times. It's still insignificant compared to the potential upside of finding the right person who would change the trajectory. So it's more about understanding that in the grand scheme of things, this is a potentially powerful growth hack.
When did you realize that this hack was possible? That another human having a conversation with you could actually have an impact? Did you come to this realization through a thinking process, reading about it somewhere, or in some other way?
I believe it was a result of learned experience gained through working with advisors throughout my 15-year entrepreneurial career. This combined with self-reflection and elevating my understanding of business from a down-to-earth approach to seeing the bigger forces behind the whole entrepreneurial journey.
This is exactly the blind spot we discussed earlier. You don't realize the value of advising until you experience it. Once you believe in it, you are willing to pay for it and make a long-term commitment. And that's why I never recommend that founders go and hire advisors. A bad hire can actually have the reverse effect and put you off working with advisors completely, make you bitter. Instead, start by reaching out and talking to people. Ask them for advice and share the troubles that you are having with your business. Some people will share their thoughts, while others will ask you good questions. Some people will even ask you such great questions that will give you a new perspective and change your mind. Eventually, through these conversations, you will experience the value of these interactions, and then you will be able to measure it against the money and equity.
Would you agree that if you were to do the math on the risks and rewards of working with an advisor, the calculation would be in favor of giving it a try?
Working with advisors is like an investment portfolio. If one of the investments perform exceptionally well, the others can fail, and you still win. Similarly, going through the hiring process, whether for an employee or an advisor, is an experiment. You are testing your hypothesis about the right fit for the role. On average, experimentation has a success rate of about 5%. So statistically, only 1 out of 20 engagements will succeed. But when it does, its impact can be tremendous.
Another common excuse that founders use is that they are too busy with operational work and now is not the right time.
It's like that cartoon where a bunch of Neanderthals is pushing a cart with square wheels. Meanwhile, there is a guy with a round wheel trying to suggest that they change their wheels. However, the Neanderthals say, "We are too busy for that," and keep pushing the cart with the square wheel.
Exactly. So my question is, do these founders really need someone to help them get out of that operational swamp? Is being too busy a valid excuse?
Is being too busy a valid excuse for anything? To me, it's a rhetorical question. You need to focus on what is important, where you can add unique and significant value, not get bogged down with everything that comes your way. Learning to say no, prioritize, and delegate are important skills. This way, you can focus on the things with the greatest impact. To me, being too busy is a sign that you need to improve those skills.
You have mentioned this to me many times that you only work with coachable people. First, what makes a person coachable? Second, why not work with those who are not coachable, help them overcome that obstacle, and develop a growth mindset?
To begin with, I would like to clarify one thing. When I say that someone is not coachable, I never mean it in a judgmental or derogatory way. It doesn't make them any less. They are simply not ready to have their convictions in certain areas challenged. We all go through these moments. I myself am still uncoachable in so many areas. The key is to learn to make yourself coachable in the areas that matter to you the most. To me, uncoachable means being highly defensive, closed-minded, and attached to one's convictions. This attitude implies that one believes they are doing everything the right way and that any opposition or criticism is wrong. This type of mindset makes a person impervious to coaching and ultimately leads to wasted time. Therefore, I choose not to work with uncoachable people, not because I dislike them, but because I don't want to waste their time or mine. On the contrary, people who are coachable either have questions or are receptive to them.
In that definition, being uncoachable is a clear path to disaster. If I see a founder of one of my portfolio companies or a friendly founder who appears uncoachable, I would prefer to bring someone like you on board to help them change rather than wait for them to become coachable.
You don't have to wait. However, helping someone become more coachable is a different task altogether. I receive similar requests for coaching from investors, members of the board, co-founders. Typically, they ask me to help founders develop specific skill sets or explore particular areas. I have never been asked to assist someone in becoming more coachable or help them become aware of their blind spots. Quite the opposite, in fact. I tend to lose most people the moment I point out their blind spots or defensive behavior. For example, when I talk to investors, board members, or co-founders and suggest that a particular person needs to work on their insecurities, defensiveness, or tendency to overrule others, I often get a dismissive response. They might say something like, "That all sounds too esoteric. too wishy-washy. We have specific business problems to solve, and we don't have time for this fluff. But here is the inconvenient truth. If you don't address these fluffy issues, you will still be in the same place a year from now. This defensiveness is what prevents the founder from improvement in certain areas and hinders the growth of the business.
Would you say it's the job of a therapist to make people coachable?
Broadly speaking, anyone whom the founder already trusts can take on this job. It could be a co-founder, a friend, or a relative. The key is to have a deeper, more open and trusting relationship. Although those people are often far from the business context, harder to identify and harder to reach, you can still find that person inside the firewall and use them as an advisor. Ask them how you could help this founder. Do you, as a friend of this founder, see this blind spot? Do you see how they react this way or how they are blocked in this way? What has been your experience in helping them overcome that? How can I make this founder feel like I'm not judging?
Is it because you end up working with these amazing coachable founders that you are successful, or is it because you reject a lot of founders? Would it be fair to say that you reject most of the founders who approach you? If so, how do you do it? What are the signals? How quickly can you determine that someone is not a good fit and is not coachable?
My usual process is to have an initial conversation with the founder to explore the problems they're struggling with and want help with. During this conversation, I aim to understand how they think about these problems, identify their blind spots and convictions, and determine what they're willing to question and what they're not. By discussing these things, I can help them see any issues they might be overlooking or not critically thinking about. In this first conversation, I try to provide actionable advice that the founder can take away and execute on. I work to come to an agreement on something that's been helpful and insightful for them and that they're willing to act on. Then I follow up with them to ensure they've followed through on their plans. This tells me a lot about their coachability. Some founders are not coachable, not because they lack willingness, but rather because of a different symptom. They often say socially acceptable and desirable things, agree with you and question things you lead them towards, but then fail to follow through. They may claim to be too busy or say that they changed their minds. While it's understandable, if we made a commitment, I look for people who are courageous enough to follow through on it or come back and say, hey, you know that thing we agreed on? I don't feel like it's the right thing to do now that I have more information. What do you think? This behavior shows the founder's curiosity and focus on the problem, not on trying to look good. I wouldn't call it rejecting founders, but rather a low click-through rate. When I go deep in the first conversation, they may become uncomfortable and self-select out. Alternatively, during the follow-up conversation, I ask about their progress and dig deeper into their responses. If they become defensive, I apologize for misunderstanding and suggest that I may not be the right person for them. In this way, we both self-select out if it's not a good fit.
Do you have any practical advice for founders on how to find an executive coach?
My advice would be, don't rush to hire an advisor. Instead, start by networking. You will find that most people who genuinely care about making an impact will have a first conversation with you free of charge. They won't have any expectations and will be happy to ask you some questions and offer advice. This doesn't obligate you to go and implement their advice straight away. It's a perspective. You are getting perspectives. To me, it is similar to hiring for an executive role. You start by reaching out to people and having initial conversations. With each conversation, you can test a hypothesis and gain insights into what questions work and what questions don't. This is how you can tune your skill set. Next, describe the problem and ask people for thoughts. Don't try to sell. When you describe your problem, if someone starts giving you advice right away, that's a bad sign. Look for people who ask questions and try to understand the situation you are describing more deeply. That's why I suggest keeping the problem description brief Let the person you are speaking to elaborate on it instead. This way you can see how good they are at their job, whether they are an executive or an advisor, because ultimately this person will have to come on board and start digging information out. The next level is assess if they are asking you great questions. Look out for questions that challenge your way of thinking and provide new perspectives, even during this initial investigation. That's a good sign. It means that your learning will be much more profound. On an even deeper level, watch if the person is providing value unconditionally. If someone points out a problem and then offers to work on it with you for a fee, that's a bad sign. As an advisor and coach, my focus is on providing you with value. It's your responsibility to compensate them if the relationship reaches that level. Plus, a special approach to executive candidates is to have their potential direct reports interview them and observe. Are they able to identify opportunities to coach their potential direct reports during the interview? This demonstrates the ability to give value freely and unconditionally. Every moment can be a coaching moment. Besides, it's important to pay attention to whether someone disagrees with you, challenges you, contradicts certain things you say, because this is part of their job. What you know, you already know. Their job is to get you to face things you don't know, things that go against your convictions, things that lie outside your comfort zone and are therefore uncomfortable for you. Finally, the conversation has to be fun, which means you must have an emotional connection. If you don't, then things become boring, mundane, and uncomfortable. After all, we are humans who enjoy other humans' company. If you find yourself repeatedly returning to one person for valuable insights and feeling a good connection, you might consider how much value they are adding. Is it worth compensating them with cash or equity for the value they provide? This is the point at which you can formalize the relationship.
This is amazing advice. As I see it, the biggest risk for young founders who are in a way blank pages is hiring the wrong advisor. Such a mistake can have an impact on the entire company,
That is true.
leading a company down the wrong path for half a year or a year, right?
Yeah, that reminds me of another thing to look out for. Find someone who respects your boundaries. You want to surround yourself with people who won't insist that you follow their advice, but rather encourage you to process and share your own thoughts. Their role is to help you critically think through the information and make your own decisions. A good coach or advisor won't impose their own strengths onto your situation, but will help you discover your own. This conversation may only last an hour and a half, but you'll make thousands of decisions every day, and they'll be more effective if they're rooted in your personal strengths, intuition, and sensitivity to risk and uncertainty. Each of us is unique in all of these aspects.
This applies specifically to coaches because when you have a functional advisor, you want them to share their framework and playbooks with you, right?
Well, I take this approach even with my lawyers and accountants. Ultimately, I am accountable. If I make a mistake, the law will come after me. In order to be confident in my decisions, they have to be mine. If someone comes in and insists that I follow their decision, it won't be defendable. I hire smart people who ask smart questions. Sooner or later, I won't be able to defend a decision that isn't mine. I stand in front of the company and announce my decision. Even if I still feel intuitively that my decision is right, I won't be able to defend it in good conscience if I can't answer smart questions about it. That's why it's important to have intuitive confidence in a decision that you've committed to through your own critical thinking.
What would be your advice to younger founders looking for an advisor? What are the chances of finding someone through cold outreach or advisor marketplaces? Do you personally reply to cold messages?
The first misconception to get rid of is assuming that a good advisor or coach must be a professional advisor or coach. This is not necessarily true. Instead, I believe A good advisor can be someone who has faced a similar problem and found a solution. They may not know the solution to your specific problem, but they have a thinking pattern that helped them overcome a similar situation. This pattern of thinking might be helpful for you as well. Therefore, consider reaching out to people who were in similar positions a few years ago. You can also connect with someone who has had a similar life path as you. This could be anyone, such as a neighbor or someone you occasionally go swimming with. Personally, I have had insightful conversations with people at the swimming pool. It is important that these people don't take themselves too seriously. In my opinion, a person's level of humility is the primary indicator of their character, second only to courage. Humble people are more likely to be open to other perspectives and curious about others, rather than being self-righteous, dogmatic, or arrogant.
If you widen your search to include non-professional advisors, it becomes much easier to find and convince them. You can simply reach out to anyone you like, even with no prior introduction or relationship.
Absolutely. Then again, don't immediately start looking for a long-term advisor. Instead, focus on the specific problem you are facing and have conversations about it.
When it comes to one-off and pool conversations, do you believe that informal advisors who lack in-depth context and only have these occasional conversations with you can replace formal coaches with a regular cadence, or can they only be complementary?
I believe that both paths are equally worthy of exploration. In your previous conversation with Elena, you mentioned that if a person can identify patterns and connect the dots, they may not need regular formal coaching. Instead, they can have ad hoc conversations and enrich their model of thinking. For those individuals, the ad hoc approach can provide just as much value as formal engagement with an advisor. I believe having a formal advisor only helps in cases where you find it challenging to open up, and it takes a long time to build trust with someone. In such situations, a longer-term relationship might be more productive.
So, if a person can open up and connect the dots, they can just speak to a lot of people and extract value out of these conversations. But what if a person doesn't yet understand the problem, as you have mentioned several times? It's a blind spot, an unknown.
Great. How does the problem manifest itself? How do you know that there is an issue?
Let's say you reach a level of conscious incompetence, which means you understand that there are many things you don't know and can't see. You want someone to help you with those things, but you don't yet understand what the problem is. Is that the right time to come to someone like you?
If you feel overwhelmed by the thought of all the things you don't know and all the things that can go wrong, and this thought pattern is paralyzing you or interfering with your work, it may be a sign of anxiety. In this case, therapy may be helpful. Unconscious incompetence is often accompanied by frustration. Despite your best efforts, you are not making progress towards your goal. This indicates that the solution you need is likely in your blind spot. To uncover it, seek advice from someone you trust and say, "Can I use you as a sounding board? I have this goal, but I'm stuck and getting frustrated. Can we brainstorm together?" Your goal may involve hiring someone, increasing revenue, or coaching a young developer on your team.
I'm trying to put myself back in the shoes of that person, basically myself a number of years ago, and I feel frustrated. On one hand, you say that I need to understand what my problem is. That is one of the signals you look at. On the other hand, imagine a situation where my company has just grown from 10 to 30 people, and I can already see that next year it is going to grow to up to 100. It's not that I have a specific problem now, but rather that I don't know anything about how to run that kind of an organization. At the same time, I hear people speaking about how great Sherali is in helping leaders grow. All you want is to go to Sherali and say, help me identify every single one of my bottlenecks, problems, biases, and everything that I need to learn to be able to manage that company.
Well, that's an excellent problem definition.
Okay, I may have misunderstood the definition of the problem, how concrete it needs to be.
A problem statement can be as concrete or as vague as you want, as long as you have a desired outcome in mind. Usually you have a specific outcome in mind, and you have a general problem that is connected to achieving it. If you don't have a desired outcome and instead say something like, well, look, I have this nagging feeling that something will go wrong, and I'm missing something and it's bothering me, it's paralyzing me, then that's more of a conversation for therapy. Even if that is the case, first try to reflect on the problem on your own. Why is it bothering me? What impact do I think it might have? What area of life is it connected to? What goal do I have in that area? If this approach is not working, talk to someone you trust, a friend, partner, or spouse, and say, can you ask me some good questions? I've asked myself a bunch and nothing has helped. If necessary, escalate the conversation to an advisor you know. Here's the situation. Something is really bothering me, but I can't put my finger on it. Can you ask me some good questions? In case the anxiety persists and significantly impacts your life, it may be beneficial to seek help from a therapist.
I think I just had an aha moment. You unlocked something for me.
What is it? What does it tell me?
It's not just about understanding and stating the problem. It's about understanding the outcome that you are trying to achieve. That's the key, right?
I believe that impact always leads towards an outcome, whatever that is, as stated in the book. If you don't know where you are going, then it doesn't matter which way you go.
Right. Let's move on to working with advisors. Let's imagine that I got lucky and I got Sherali as my executive coach. What does the process look like? What kind of onboarding do you go through?
It depends on the problem that people come to me with. Founders often come to me with problems related to their revenue stack. In those cases, I look into the numbers, the strategies they have tried so far, what has worked and what hasn't.
Let's focus on leadership coaching because you have a unique experience with that.
Okay. First, I want to get the problem statement from the person herself. Next, I meet a few more people. If one of them is a founder, I begin by talking to the executive team members who work most closely with them to understand their perspective. How do they see the founder behaving? How do they see them in the context of this problem? Additionally, I talk to people who work with the founder most frequently, but who are not on the executive team. I like to get a 360-degree view to identify blind spots. Since the founder can only give me the picture they see, I aim to uncover the whole picture.
I remember you worked with my company, Borzo. You talked to all of us, the entire leadership team. I'm curious if you remember the problem statement by any chance that Mike told you about Borzo.
Initially, you approached me to discuss how to make OKRs work. However, we soon discovered that OKRs were the least of your problems. Your main challenge was getting the team to work together effectively to execute those OKRs.
Okay, so first you try to assess the situation from all angles. What's next?
In the next few conversations, I try poking the blind spots. Think of it as a Venn diagram. One area, the known knowns, represents things I learned during this 360 assessment that the founder is aware of. The second area, known unknowns, includes things that the team brought to my attention that the founder knows about but does not consider important. Finally, there are things that the team is telling me that the founder is not even aware of. First, we address the low-hanging fruit, the known knowns. This unlocks some skills and allows the founder to fix a few things. We then move on to address the areas that the founder is aware of but doesn't consider problematic. Encouraging the founder to become more diligent and disciplined in some of the skills they already know they should be sticking to unlocks their performance in those areas and helps them eliminate some of those problems. These are still relatively easy to address. Gradually, I delve into the areas where the founder denies having any problems. I can't push too hard because I might touch a nerve, causing the founder to close off immediately. Besides, the founder might feel judged or mistrusted given that I am probing areas they previously said were not an issue. This is a slower and longer term process.
After the initial assessment, do you continue to work with the entire leadership team or only those who are relevant? Or is that up to the founder?
The approach depends on the desired outcome. If the goal is to achieve OKRs, the focus should be on the team's internal dynamics, issues, health, and skills. If the founder is having difficulty with their team, such as influencing, making decisions, or getting them to work well together, it's more about the founder themselves. In this case, we work one-on-one. However, it's still important to follow up every now and then, for example, during offsites or once every 3 to 6 months, to get feedback from the executive team. This feedback is crucial as it can reveal blind spots that the founder may have missed. Otherwise, I risk falling into the trap of only seeing things from the founder's perspective.
Okay, can you give examples of the types of sessions or workshops that you conduct within the company? Specifically, I may have heard of a very painful exercise that you run for founders. Could you describe that one in vivid detail?
What's that one?
It's the one where the team gives very candid feedback to the founder.
In reality, this exercise is not particularly painful. It may be uncomfortable at first, but ultimately it can be cathartic. Off-sites that focus on team health, dynamics, and personal development can help a group of people become a team. I measure success by observing the team's relationships on the first day. Initially, team members may not be warm towards each other, focus solely on tasks or business matters. The relationships feel strained. However, if the offsite goes well, by the end of the first day, team members may start hugging, lingering around, and not wanting to leave. These are the most successful offsites because they break the ice between people. The team becomes warmer and closer. This leads to a new level of trust that becomes the foundation for everything else the team builds upon. This particular exercise that you mentioned comes from The Table Group by Patrick Lencioni, author of The Advantage, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and The Ideal Team Player. They have a lot of really good material. There are 2 more exercises that I would like to highlight. The first one involves sharing a little bit about the past. I typically ask 3 questions. Where were you born? Tell us a little bit about your siblings. What was the most challenging thing for you growing up? These questions warm up the team and lead to personal stories about things like bullying and parents divorcing. While challenging and uncomfortable, this exercise is helpful in creating empathy and compassion among the team. At the end of the day, we have another exercise. During this session, we go around the circle and give each person one piece of appreciation feedback and one piece of feedback on their growth area. The phenomenal thing about it is that people realize that those around them actually see them, not only their negative sides, but their positive sides as well. We are perceived the way we want to be perceived, and this is a powerful force. It brings us instantly closer to one another. As a result, we achieve less defensiveness and more effective team-based decision-making. However, I often feel that teams lack simple skills, such as conducting effective retrospectives on the previous quarter. Some of the most powerful offsites were simply centered around these retrospectives. During these sessions, we would analyze the data, evaluate what worked and what didn't, determine areas for improvement, and tweak the revenue model.
The sharing session is very powerful. I've also heard that you run a session where the direct reports of a founder or CEO sit around them and speak freely about their feelings toward their manager. I'm curious about how this session is run and how you manage to get people to speak openly about their boss.
First, I speak with people myself and try to build trust by making them feel comfortable and not judged. I promise that any information we discuss will remain anonymous, which gives them an opportunity to share and get things off their chest. Then I ask them, which of these things they are willing to share and which they are willing for me to share on their behalf. However, I always encourage people to share firsthand. I also ask which of these things they would be willing to discuss with their boss in a team setting. Once they have opened up a little and committed to specific topics, and it doesn't have to be a lot, I am not trying to solve any particular problems. I am trying to give them the feeling that they can discuss more and that they don't need me anymore once they have experienced that they can do it without punishment or attack. This becomes super valuable and people really want to continue doing it.
Okay. How harsh is the feedback given during these sessions? Can you provide examples of the most impactful comments made and their potential impact on the founders? Were there any surprising revelations?
Surprisingly, many of those things are fairly simple and benign. We often assign heavy meaning to small things. For example, founders tend to work all the time, live and breathe their startup, and think about their problems constantly. As a result, they may send Slack messages or emails at any time of day or night. This can create a common problem for the team, who may feel pressure to answer at any hour. They worry that they have to reply at 2 a.m., even though they also want to have a life outside of work. Unfortunately, they may be afraid to voice their concerns and discuss the issue with the founder, thinking that the founder expects them to work 24/7. However, the moment they do voice their concerns, they may be surprised to find that the founder just works this way and that they are free to reply whenever they want. They may even suggest scheduling emails to be sent at a more reasonable time. Furthermore, if they receive an email late at night that is not urgent, they can simply reply in the morning without worrying about it. Once they have this agreement, everyone can relax and work together more effectively.
Indeed, simple, or maybe not so simple if you dig into it, but that definitely sounds simple and I think relevant to a lot of founders. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your expectations from the people that you work with. What are the minimal requirements in terms of discipline, cadence, preparation for sessions with you? What do you expect of people?
I'd like to think that I'm fairly flexible in that sense. Situations change, information changes. What we discussed today could become irrelevant tomorrow or an hour later. You walked out of this meeting, you had another meeting with someone, you got additional information that invalidated everything we discussed here. That's possible. So I'm fairly okay with things changing. The one thing I ask for is transparency. Acknowledge those things. Tell me, look, I didn't work on this because, and here are my reasons. And let me decide, do I want to dig into it or not? Do I feel like there is something that could be a blind spot that you need to acknowledge or not? And if you can, try to let me know as early as possible. So I don't spend a week or 2 weeks or months expecting that you're working on that thing and then preparing to follow up on it, and etc. If you let me know early on, then I can prepare to pursue different areas, different lines of questioning. So transparency is really important to me. Another thing is the problems you're bringing, they are for you. They are your problems. If you bring in an unimportant problem, then you're wasting your own time. I'm happy to dig into any problem you bring to me, but accountability for solving it or not solving it is entirely on you. You have to remember that, because when I start digging, I'm not doing it to judge you. I'm not doing it to assess you or give you a mark or tell you're a good boy or a good girl, etc. I'm doing it to try and help you.
Okay, that's sort of my mindset preparation, right? I read in the Coaching Habit book, I think it was that book that had a guide on how to run one-on-one meetings. And one of the things that it said there was that if your direct reports come to your one-of-ones unprepared, they don't have an agenda, for example, that it's a signal that the meetings are not very important to them and you are not doing something right as a manager. That somehow stuck with me. And I wonder if it's similar in a way that the people you work with must have some kind of discipline to collect the thoughts between the sessions, to collect the insights and the questions and the feedback on the previous conversation, if that is something that you expect, or this is too much to expect from busy founders and CEOs.
Well, that's a slightly different situation with a coach, with an advisor. It's a bit of an asymmetric situation in terms of accountability. When you have a conversation with your direct report, that person is accountable for some deliverables, for some outcomes. But if those outcomes are not reached, it impacts you as their manager because you are the ultimate accountable for their outcomes. You have a vested interest in those outcomes being achieved. You're accountable for them too. And that's why you're constantly juggling two hats, a coach and the manager. A manager has deadlines, deliverables, baselines to hit, metrics to hit, etc. And that's why I think in one-on-one setting with the direct report, it's important that both of you are prepared. Both of you have some agendas. And if your direct report isn't prepared, either they lack the skill to understand why this meeting is important and how to make the most of it, or you are not making it relevant to them. You're not playing your part either to hold them accountable, to focus on the right areas, because if you focus on the right outcomes over and over and over, it becomes relevant to what they're doing every day.
If we transition from this to a more general question then of proactive versus reactive advisors, and advisors who act a little bit as a manager for the people they work with, right? So I've had experience with both, and I have people on my team that have advisors that, in some case, some of those advisors, like our friend Matt, for example, he literally over time became almost like a direct manager, a boss of the person he was advising. And that, at least at that time, seemed to me like an ideal scenario. He was pushing, he was asking the questions, he was holding the person accountable for the OKRs, he was interfering and facilitating some group sessions when he didn't see that things were moving as they were expected. And at least at that point, that seemed right to me in our setup, given that he was the most knowledgeable person in the company. He knew what to expect from it, a very tangible and measurable function. We also have another advisor who is more reactive. So he comes in and he expects questions, right? And I know that a person on my team is a bit frustrated in that because he doesn't always know the questions to ask. He wouldn't mind that advisor acting more like a boss. What do you think? Where's the balance?
Again, I think these are tools. I think it would be a mistake to self-identify with one or the other and say, well, I'm this kind of coach. Those are just tools. I have some clients where I'm more in a, if you like, project manager, program manager type capacity.
I understand these are tools and you can wear both hats or anywhere in between those, but whose responsibility it is to identify when to act more like a boss or when not? Is it the responsibility of the coach to kind of feel the situation, or responsibility of the founders or CEO, whoever?
Well, I think first it has to start with an agreement. What do you want from me in this scenario? Do you want me to help you discover or learn some skills, discover some blind spots, understand how to think about it better? Or do you want me to engage with the project and kind of manage it along the way? With some of my early customers, when we were deeper rolling out OKRs as a practice in the company, I played a more engaged role. I would join all the OKR reviews or facilitate them. I would push them, challenge them to join the offsites and work for 2-3 days and work on planning those OKRs and facilitate those conversations or facilitate committing to OKRs. And currently I have a couple of clients where I'm playing that role as well, because the projects that they're rolling out, they are quite significant, kind of at the executive level. And the founder asked me to play that role. With most of my clients, that's not what they ask. They come and say, I have a difficulty here. Can you help me think through it? Can you ask me some questions? I still remain accountable. I still drive this thing, and that's okay. I just want to know what I'm missing. That's more of a passive role. But there, I expect them to follow through. We agree on something this week. 2 or 3 weeks later, we come back. I expect you to have tried and executed that. succeeded or failed, doesn't matter, and got some insights, and we can discuss these insights and continue from there.
But would you take responsibility for that if, say, founder comes to you, or let's say functional lead comes to their advisor and says, my desired outcome of this is to accelerate the growth. Let's say something is stagnating, right? And there are interactions, there are sessions. Is that the responsibility of the coach, of the advisor, to say, look, you're not growing and you're probably still not doing this, not doing that. Just ask the right questions and to kind of be informally accountable and at least worry about the ultimate outcome, not just each individual session.
I don't believe in informal accountable. You're either accountable or not. It's binary. And if you're, let's say, this kind of soft, informal accountable, let's imagine I'm in that role. I come to a meeting, I start asking uncomfortable questions, trying to hold people accountable. And let's say head of sales tells me, well, yeah, okay, I understand that's really important. But during the week, I had this other conversation with the founder. We decided to focus on this other thing, and that's what I've been working on. What do you do then?
You mentioned earlier that, let's say, it's a founder's responsibility to bring the problem. If they just want to come and talk, you're fine with this. But are you really fine with it, that you're not accountable for the ultimate outcome?
Being accountable to me has freedoms, but also has responsibilities. There have to be certain consequences, right? And if I'm not in that structure of consequences, then I'm not really accountable. The second thing is, it also depends on me. Do I want to join this project? Do I want to engage with this topic, with this project or not? So if the founder asks me, can you drive this thing? First, I will consider if I'm interested or not. But second, I will also consider what would that entail? What are the critical conditions that might arise? And can I facilitate through those or not?
Can you exert your influence indirectly, not by engaging into the project specifically, but just by helping identify the root cause of the blocker, the lowest hanging fruits, whatnot?
That's the question I'll ask myself. Can I facilitate through this in other ways, influencing people on this team through certain decision making along the way?
So what I've seen, I guess what maybe frustrated me a bit is that when you come, you say, I don't have an agenda today. So I'm talking to my advisor and say, oh, I don't have an agenda. And advisor says like, okay, all right, let's talk about something. And maybe I'm wearing right now a bit more mundane hat and playing devil's advocate, right? But what I could expect from a functional advisor, at least, is to start asking questions like, okay, you don't have an agenda today, but how are you doing on your OKRs? What's going on? And start digging. Maybe the agenda will quickly pop up.
Of course, that's a role of any good advisor. But that also will rely on how much context you have, which comes back to that earlier topic of regular advisors. If you've been talking regularly, if there is enough shared context, then sometimes you can come and say, look, I've had such a hellish day. I didn't think of this. I've had something prepared before, but it doesn't feel relevant anymore. Can you ask me some questions to stack with? That's also okay. And sometimes I will start digging around how the person's feeling, try and find a strong emotion and see what is it attached to, and then start digging around that subject.
It's not uncommon for founders to struggle to keep up with their advisors. In fact, I ran into this problem quite quickly when we worked together. During our first few conversations, you recommended several books. While I can read quickly, I still needed a lot of time to digest, implement, and learn from them. As a result, I felt like I was falling behind. And with another session coming up, I felt slightly pressured because we had agreed to a certain cadence and we're paying for it. Is this a good thing? A bad thing? How should we deal with it?
I believe it's a good thing. When we touch on some area that is new to the founder, I do recommend a lot of reading materials. Reading provides nuanced context and allows you to learn from the experiences of great people. However, I don't expect you to read everything right away. If you feel like you didn't have enough time to complete the reading, we can still work with whatever volume you managed, even if it's just a few paragraphs. What did you learn from them? What insights did you gain? Did any particular points stand out to you? Let's discuss those.
Yeah, reading is not usually the biggest issue. It's the implementation.
Yeah, same.
If you discover a blind spot, and it takes me months to work on it, all that time it occupies space in my head. Meanwhile, new insights keep coming, and my head starts to explode as I try to reconcile them and change my behavior accordingly.
That's why, with most of my clients, I create a dedicated page in their editor of choice: Notion, Google Docs, iOS Notes, etc. The page's structure includes a table at the top that lists the current OKRs, whether they are personal or work-related, that we are focusing on. These OKRs represent desired outcomes. Next, we have a list of action items, which are the commitments we have made so far. Additionally, we keep meeting notes with the most recent ones at the top. I encourage founders to use this page as a place to dump their insights when working through things. I suggest we make it a living record of what's going on. If we agreed on some action items and you started executing, but things didn't go as planned, you still gain valuable observations and insights. Please share them with me or write them down here, as they are important to discuss. Ultimately, I highly recommend an approach to life in general that everything is an experiment. Everything is a hypothesis and subject to testing.
That's a good one. My insight is that you should prioritize something that is key for the next period and focus on that. Don't stress too much about not being able to keep up with the rest.
Absolutely. Expectations are the root of all evil. Let's try not to have expectations. Let's try to see the reality as it evolves. Look at the facts. In this way, we can learn better and have a good time in the process.
Right. Have no expectations, have fun, and treat everything as an experiment. That's a perfect approach to life. What's your average tenure? I understand that there is an infinite range of life scenarios, but I'm curious nonetheless.
I think the average duration would be 9 or 12 months. I have had some engagements where the project was specific, short-lived, and was over in 3 months. I also have had some relationships that lasted for 5, 7 years.
The most practical questions are related to compensation, right? Elena and you both mentioned that advisors are essentially the only people who are employed in the company but don't have direct accountability. How does this fact impact an optimal compensation structure in terms of stock, vesting, cliff, and the share of cash and equity? What are your thoughts?
Well, I may not be your typical advisor. From the very beginning, it was difficult for me to see advising, coaching as a full-time job. I feel that I grow more than my clients through these engagements. Therefore, I am often willing to have introductory conversations or shorter engagements where people pay me a fraction of my cost, depending on their situation, or even no equity. I am also comfortable with situations where I have a longer cliff condition and then spend 3 to 6 months working with a founder and part ways without receiving any equity because I did not reach the cliff. For me, this is more of a journey. In general, here is what we do. We have 1 or 2 introductory conversations. If the founder finds them impactful, they come back with an offer for a formal engagement. For the first 3 months, I suggest that we work for cash only, so the founder doesn't feel the pressure of having to worry about equity. The founders with whom we end up working long-term offer equity. Some of them even start vesting from the first day because they feel like they received enough value and want to reciprocate. So I often leave it up to founders. The hardest question for me is, how much does it cost? I usually say, well, this is how much it formally cost, and this is the recommended rate from TechCrunch. For some companies like Atlassian, for example, to approve equity is 7 circles of hell. At the same time, they have enough money in the bank to pay me my full rate in cash. That's okay with me, no hurt feelings. However, this does not mean that I will insist on the same hourly rate with a struggling startup, especially if they have a mission that I can relate to and they are making the world a better place. I am far more pro-mission than pro-money, so all terms are negotiable for me.
Does the standard recommendation include both cash and equity?
No, the TechCrunch recommendation is just stock.
Is that your preferred ideal scenario? If you like the company and the company likes you, is equity your preferred compensation because you can afford it at this point in your life, for example?
No, payment is also a way to hold the founders accountable and keep the pressure on to execute. The cash component motivates them to make every hour count, while the equity component makes them feel accountable for working towards significant long-term outcomes, or to fire me early on. I want to be fired when we reach the end of the road, so the founder doesn't have to feel guilty, self-conscious, or insecure about having that conversation.
This is very insightful. I also think it's not just a financial question. So what you are saying is that both components are instruments for instilling the right dynamics and ensuring skin in the game for both sides. I may be mistaken, but I believe that the law of diminishing returns applies to advising. How would you describe the curve from the beginning to the end? What signals the end of the relationship?
For a founder, it's a feeling that you are not consistently getting as much value anymore.
Let's start with the curve first. Initially, it's onboarding time and there is a peak. What does it look like after that?
I expect myself to start adding value even during onboarding, but all I have are questions. I hold myself accountable to that. Ideally, the curve starts high and then gradually decreases, and that's okay. There is a principle that states that everyone rises to their level of incompetence. Over time, the founder and the company will outgrow the advisor, which is a good thing. It means that the relationship has been productive and has led to the growth of the founder. If I feel like I'm not consistently impacting the founder after 2 or 3 meetings, it's an important signal that we may have reached the end of our journey together. At this point, I ask the founder to critically think about the same.
Can you recall and describe the most powerful aha eureka moment in your advising career?
For me or for my client,
I guess they are interconnected, but for you.
learning detachment was the most powerful lesson for me. I came from being inside the company, building, driving towards the goals, and being accountable. Early in my journey as a coach, I had a strong desire to make things happen, to push founders to see what I see, and to make certain decisions. I had an aha moment when I realized that it's not my company, and I am not a part of it. If the founders choose to, they can drive their company into the ground, and they have the right to make that choice. I need to respect their personal boundaries and their right to make decisions. Pushing harder than necessary is actually disrespecting their boundaries. This realization was deep and powerful for me, and it allowed me to be more curious and show empathy more easily. A couple of years later, I was watching an interview with Dalai Lama in which he said that without detachment, you cannot truly show empathy, and I understood what he meant.
I feel like this is a very powerful realization. I had a similar insight about management, except in that case, you do set boundaries and don't let people crash and burn your company. Final question. Elena believes that hiring advisors is a superpower. Do you share this opinion, or do you think it's overrated?
I feel like there is another layer beneath this. Hiring advisors is merely a symptom. The true superpower lies in being open to learning from others.
All right, this has been Sherali Karimov. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, everyone. We'll be back with more fun and excitement. Until then, stay safe and good night, everybody.